The Aspen Ridge County Courthouse smelled like old wood and radiator heat, the kind of warmth that exists only to remind you how cold it is outside. Through the tall windows behind the judge's bench, the Rockies pressed white and enormous against a pale January sky. Snow had been falling since before dawn, and by 9 in the morning, the parking lot was a blank page. Clara Bennett sat at the respondent's table and kept her hands folded in her lap. She was 21 years old and wore the only blazer she owned, charcoal gray. Bought second-hand from a thrift store in Denver 2 winters ago for a job interview she hadn't gotten. Beside her, Noah Carter sat very still. 40 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had learned to give nothing away. He wore a navy suit that fit him correctly, which was more than Clara could say for herself. She had met him 8 months ago. She had married him 3 months ago. She still wasn't sure, on most mornings, what exactly that made them. The gallery was quiet in the specific way courtrooms go quiet when everyone in the room knows that something uncomfortable is about to happen. Clara could feel the weight of it across her shoulder blades. 2 rows back sat Gerald and Norma Fielding, Noah's former in-laws, Sophie's maternal grandparents. Gerald had the stiff posture of a man who had spent 30 years convincing himself he was right about everything. Norma kept her gloved hands pressed together in her lap and did not look at Clara at all. Sophie Carter sat between her father and her court-appointed advocate, a woman named Miss Pryor who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain. Sophie was 9 years old and had her father's stillness. She wore a green wool dress and had braided her own hair that morning, imperfectly, which Clara knew because she had stood in the hallway outside Sophie's bedroom and listened to the quiet, concentrated sounds of a child doing a difficult thing alone rather than ask for help. The Fieldings' attorney, a man named Douglas Hartwell, stood from his chair with the deliberate ease of someone who had done this many times and knew it. "Your Honor," Hartwell said, "the petitioners Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Fielding are asking this court to reconsider the current custody arrangement for Sophie Renee Carter, age 9. It is our position that the child's present home environment does not meet the stability standards required under Colorado family law. Specifically, we ask the court to examine the nature of the marriage between Mr. Noah Carter and Miss Clara Bennett." He paused to let that land. "A marriage," he said, "that was contracted approximately 3 months ago, under circumstances that we believe warrant scrutiny." Judge Patricia Holloway was a compact woman in her mid-50s with steel-gray hair pulled back without ornament. She had read every document in this file before the session began. She was not easily impressed, and she was not easily moved, and she looked at the courtroom with the calm attention of someone who had learned to distinguish between performed emotion and real pain. "Proceed, Mr. Hartwell," she said. Hartwell turned toward the respondent's table, and Clara felt the shift in the room's attention like a change in air pressure. "Mrs. Carter," Hartwell said, and the title still sat strangely in Clara's chest. "I'd like to ask you directly, and I want to remind you that you are under oath. Is your marriage to Noah Carter a genuine marriage? Or is it, in fact, an arrangement, a legal instrument designed to present a more favorable picture to this court?" The room went very still. Someone in the gallery coughed once and then seemed to regret it. Noah did not look at Clara. He was watching his hands. Sophie, beside her advocate, sat with her chin slightly lifted, the way she did when she was working something out internally and didn't want anyone to notice. Clara looked at Hartwell for a long moment. Then she looked at Judge Holloway. "Your Honor," she said, "may I answer that question in full?" Holloway studied her. "You may, Mrs. Carter." Clara stood up. "Yes," Clara said. "When we married, it was an arrangement." The sound that moved through the gallery was not quite a gasp. It was more like the collective release of breath from people who had been holding it in anticipation of exactly this. Hartwell permitted himself a brief, controlled expression of satisfaction. "And can you describe the terms of that arrangement?" Clara kept her voice level. She had rehearsed none of this. That was the strange part. She had walked into this courtroom without a script, which was either brave or foolish, and she genuinely could not tell which. "My family has a small business," she said. "My parents, my father, Raymond Bennett, and my mother, Diane Bennett, have operated a bakery in Glenwood Springs for 22 years. Last spring, my father had a cardiac event. The medical bills, combined with the operating costs during the months he was recovering, put them into serious debt. The kind of debt that does not resolve itself." She paused. The radiators ticked. "I met Noah Carter through a mutual acquaintance. He is a man of means, and he needed at the time to demonstrate a stable, two-parent home environment, as the Fieldings' challenge to his custody was becoming more serious. I needed financial support for my family. We sat across from each other at a diner in Glenwood Springs and worked out what that would look like. He would settle my parents' debts. In exchange, I would marry him and present as a genuine partner through the duration of the legal proceeding." Hartwell nodded slowly, as though he were hearing exactly what he had expected to hear. "So the marriage was transactional." "The marriage began as a transaction," Clara said. "Yes. And has money changed hands?" "The debts have been settled." "Yes. So you received payment for entering this marriage. That's one way to describe it. Is there another way?" Clara looked at him steadily. "There are several." Hartwell opened his mouth to continue, but Clara was already speaking. "I told you what the agreement was," she said. "I want to tell you what happened after." Holloway raised a hand just slightly, a minimal gesture, and Hartwell closed his mouth. "Go ahead, Mrs. Carter," the judge said. Clara turned to face the courtroom, not theatrically, not for effect, but because what she was about to say felt like something that needed to be said toward the room and not just toward the bench. She was aware of Sophie watching her. She was aware of Norma Fielding's steady, cold attention. She was aware of Noah, who still had not looked up. "When I moved into that house," Clara said, "I had a plan. Keep things cordial. Be present enough to be convincing. Maintain my own schedule. Finish my second year at the University of Denver. I was organized about it. I thought I understood exactly what I was walking into." She stopped. "Then I met Sophie. Mr. Hartwell asked me to prove the nature of my feelings," Clara said. "I'm not going to talk about Noah. I'm going to talk about his daughter." She could feel, in the silence, that the room had shifted. This was not the testimony Hartwell had been building toward. He had expected a collapse, a contradiction, or at best, a convincing performance. He had not expected this. "Sophie Carter drinks chamomile tea with honey," Clara said. "She stirs it exactly 5 times clockwise before she takes the first sip. She has done this every single morning that I have lived in that house. And one morning I asked her where she learned it, and she said she read in a book that hot liquids in ceramics need to be stirred for even heat distribution. She was 9 years old. She had read that in a book about kitchen chemistry that she had borrowed from the school library and renewed 3 times. Someone in the gallery made a quiet sound. She locks her bedroom door twice every night," Clara continued. "Not once, twice. She tries the handle after the first lock, just to confirm it's engaged, and then she locks it again. I asked her about it once, and she said she wasn't sure why, that she had just always done it. I didn't push. I understood that some habits are not about fear. They are about the small rituals that make a person feel like themselves in a house that has lost something." Clara had not planned to say that. It came out, and she let it sit. She is building a model of the Aspen Ridge Community Church out of corrugated cardboard and Elmer's glue. She has been working on it for 6 weeks. She measured the actual building with a measuring tape she borrowed from her father's toolbox. She is aiming for a scale ratio of 1 to 47, which she chose because it produces dimensions that fit on her desk. When she explained this to me, she was completely matter-of-fact about it. Like, of course, she had measured a building. Like, of course, she had calculated a scale ratio. She is 9. Judge Holloway was watching Clara with an expression that was carefully neutral, which was not the same as an expression that was unmoved. I did not go into that house intending to become anything to Sophie Carter, Clara said. I want to be honest about that, because this court has asked me to be honest, and I think Sophie deserves honesty more than she deserves a performance. I went in with a plan. I was going to be polite and functional, and then, when this was over, I was going to go back to my life. She paused. I didn't expect to care about whether she ate breakfast. I didn't expect to worry when she came home from school, quiet, in the particular way that means something went wrong. But she's decided not to say anything. I didn't expect to learn what a scale ratio of 1 to 47 means, or why chamomile tea needs to be stirred clockwise, or what it sounds like when a 9-year-old locks her door twice in the dark. The room was completely still. But that's what happened, Clara said. And I don't know how to present that to this court as a legal argument, so I'm just telling you the truth. What began as an arrangement is now something I do not have a clean word for, but it is real, and it is hers, Sophie's, more than it is mine or Noah's. She built it without trying, just by being herself. She sat down. Judge Holloway looked at her notes for a long moment before she looked up. I'd like to hear from Sophie, she said, if Sophie is willing. Miss Pryor leaned toward the girl beside her and said something quietly. Sophie nodded once, with precision, and stood. She walked to the witness stand the way she walked most places, like she was going somewhere specific for a specific reason, and had no interest in being watched doing it. She sat down and adjusted the microphone, and then looked at the judge with her hands settled in her lap. Sophie, Judge Holloway said, and her voice was measurably gentler than it had been for the rest of the morning. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to answer. Do you understand that? Yes, Sophie said. I want to ask you something simple, and I want you to answer honestly, even if you think the honest answer might not make people happy. Can you do that? Yes, Sophie said again. In your own opinion, not what anyone has told you, not what you think people want to hear. What do you believe is best for you? The room waited. Sophie looked at her hands briefly, and then back at the judge. I read some things about how custody decisions work, she said. In the gallery, someone made a quiet sound that wasn't quite a laugh, too startled for that, too surprised. Holloway's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Did you? I read that the court is supposed to make decisions based on the best interests of the child, which is me, Sophie said, with the specific clarity of someone who wants to make sure the definitions are established before proceeding. So, I wanted to understand what that meant. And what did you find? It means the court looks at things like stability and emotional bonds, and the ability of the parent to provide for the child's needs. She paused. I looked up all of those things, and what did you conclude? Sophie looked at her father. It was a direct, calm look, the look of someone who has already worked through the emotional part of something privately and arrived at the clarity on the other side. My dad is my dad, she said. He has always been my dad. He knows that I don't like the seam on the inside of socks. He knows I need the hall light left on until I fall asleep, even though I keep telling him I don't need it anymore. He drove 4 hours to get me the specific kind of colored pencils that don't smear when I'm working on the church, because the ones at the Aspen Ridge craft store smear. She stopped for a moment. When she continued, her voice was the same, careful, precise, but something underneath it had changed slightly, the way a foundation changes when weight is placed on it correctly. Clara is not my mom, Sophie said. I know she's not my mom. My mom died when I was 5, and I know what that is, and I'm not confused about it. The room held very still. But Clara is someone I trust, Sophie said. And I don't trust a lot of people, so that means something. She didn't try to make me like her. She didn't try to be something she wasn't. She just learned things about me. On purpose, when she thought I wasn't watching. She paused. I was watching. She looked at the judge. I don't want to live with my grandparents, she said. They are good people, but they are not my home. My home is with my dad, and right now, Clara is part of that home too. And I think, if you take me away from it, you won't be making things safer for me. You'll just be making things quieter. And quiet is not the same as good." She waited. Holloway said, after a moment, "Thank you, Sophie." Sophie nodded, stood up, and walked back to her seat in the particular matter-of-fact way that made certain people in the gallery put their hands briefly over their mouths. They left the courthouse at 11:42 in the morning. The snow was coming down in earnest now, dense and slow, the kind that settles rather than swirls. Noah pulled the car out of the parking lot and onto the mountain road, and the windshield wipers went back and forth in the silence, clearing and clearing. Sophie sat in the back seat with her seatbelt correctly fastened and her green wool dress smoothed over her knees. She had her library book open on her lap, a book about structural engineering that she had obtained through an interlibrary loan, which was a process she had managed entirely herself. She was not reading it. She was looking at the page. Clara sat in the passenger seat. She had taken off the blazer and folded it across her knees. She watched the pines go by on either side of the road, dark against the white. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Sophie said, from the back seat, quietly, "Are we going to be okay?" The word okay existed in the car between them, like something fragile. Noah kept his eyes on the road. The wipers moved. Outside, the mountain was patient and enormous, and entirely indifferent to the question. Clara turned around in her seat. Sophie was looking at her with the particular directness that she always used when she actually needed an answer, as opposed to the times she asked questions she already knew the answers to and was simply being thorough. "The judge hasn't decided yet," Clara said. She did not say, "Don't worry," or "It'll be fine," or "I'm sure it will work out," because Sophie was a person who noticed when adults softened truth into something easier to swallow, and she did not appreciate it. "We'll get the decision in a few weeks. But right now," Sophie said. "Right now," Clara said. "You're going home with us." Sophie looked at her for another moment. Then she went back to her book, which she still wasn't reading. But some of the tension had gone out of her shoulders. Noah exhaled slowly, barely audibly. Clara faced forward again. They drove through the snow. Sophie declared, approximately 4 minutes after walking through the front door, that a day like this required something chocolate, and that she would need help. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house, which was partly the copper-bottomed pans and the old range that ran hot, and partly something less quantifiable, the accumulated habit of mornings in that room, of breakfast made and dishes washed, and a small person conducting the daily project of herself at the kitchen table, with a book and a mug of tea stirred exactly 5 times. Clara found the recipe written in Sophie's handwriting on an index card, tucked beneath the flour tin. It was precise, measured in grams, with the oven temperature written as both Fahrenheit and Celsius, and the resting time noted in minutes and seconds. "You wrote this yourself?" Clara asked. "I adjusted it," Sophie said, tying her apron, an adult-sized apron, knotted twice at the waist so it didn't drag. "The original used butter in the frosting, but I think shortening gives a better structural result for piping, so I substituted." "For piping," Clara said. "I'm going to pipe the courtroom," Sophie said, as though this were obvious. Clara looked at her for a moment, then got the shortening down from the cabinet. They worked side by side at the counter, Sophie directing with the quiet confidence of someone on familiar ground. The flour went first, sifted. Then the cocoa. Then the eggs, which Sophie cracked with the economy of long practice, one-handed, no shells. Clara had once watched a culinary school student crack an egg that way on a video and had found it impressive. Sophie did it without looking. Noah came in from the hallway sometime around the point when the batter was in the pan. He stood in the doorway with his jacket still on and his car keys still in his hand, and he watched them. Sophie was explaining something about the relationship between fat content and moisture retention in baked goods. Clara was listening and measuring. He stood there for a long time without either of them noticing. 3 months ago, Clara had stood in this kitchen for the first time, and catalogued it in her mind, the practical layout, the slightly worn linoleum, the crayon drawing of a horse pinned to the refrigerator with a pineapple magnet, and had thought, with a feeling she hadn't named at the time, "This is a real house, a house where someone actually lives." She had meant it as an observation. It had turned into something she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Noah hung his jacket on the hook by the back door and said, "What are we making?" "A courthouse," Sophie said. "Chocolate, with the piping bags." "Obviously," Noah said, and went to wash his hands. The cake turned out well. Sophie piped the outline of a building on the top of it with startling architectural confidence. And then they ate it at the kitchen table, with the porch light on and the snow piling up against the window glass, and the evening came in around them quietly, the way evenings do in mountain towns in winter. After Sophie went to bed, after Clara had heard the click of the lock and then the silence and then the second click, she came back downstairs and found Noah sitting in the armchair in the living room. The fireplace was going. He had his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely together, and he was looking at nothing in particular in the direction of the fire. Clara sat on the couch across from him and tucked her feet under herself. For a while, neither of them spoke. This was not unusual. They had developed, in 3 months of cohabitation, a somewhat functional system for silence, the kind of silence that was not avoidance, but was simply two people existing in the same space, without requiring anything of each other. It was one of the things Clara had not expected about the arrangement, that it would be comfortable, sometimes, in specific, quiet ways. "You didn't have to do that today," Noah said finally. "What did I do?" "You told the truth. I was under oath." "You told more truth than you had to," he said. "You didn't have to tell them how the agreement started. Hartwell would have had a harder time proving it." Clara considered this. It felt dishonest not to. "It cost you." "It cost the arrangement?" she said. "I'm not sure it cost me." He looked at her, then actually looked at her, with the full attention he usually kept rationed out in careful increments. Noah Carter was not a man who looked at people carelessly. When he looked at you, you felt it. "I didn't think this would become real," he said. It wasn't an apology or an accusation, it was just a statement of something true. "Neither did I," Clara said. "When did it change?" She thought about it seriously, because he was asking seriously. "About 3 weeks in," she said. "Sophie had a nightmare. I heard her from the hallway. She makes this specific sound, not crying exactly, more like she's fighting something in her sleep. Noah, you were in Denver for that conference." It was 2 in the morning. He had gone still. "I didn't know if I should go in or not," Clara said. "She barely knew me. I thought she'd be scared if a near stranger came into her room." But the sound kept going. She paused. "I went in. I sat on the edge of her bed, and I didn't say anything. And after a minute, she stopped. She never fully woke up. She just stopped. And in the morning, at breakfast, she didn't mention it." Clara looked at the fire. "But she stirred her tea 6 times that morning," she said. "1 extra rotation. I noticed. I didn't say anything." Noah was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the snow had slowed to something intermittent, stray flakes catching the porch light. "I'm not good at saying things," he said finally. "I know. I notice them. The things. I just don't say them." "I know that too," Clara said. The silence after that was different. It had weight in it, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was the silence of 2 people who have each said something they had not planned to say and are now quietly reckoning with the fact of having said it. Clara had spent most of her adult life being careful with words, choosing them, containing them, offering only what was necessary and keeping the rest in reserve. She had thought of that as precision. Sitting across from Noah Carter in the firelight, she was not certain that precision and withholding were actually the same thing. "I didn't think I'd be afraid of you leaving," Noah said, quietly, almost to himself. "The deal was that when this was over, you'd go back to Denver. We both knew that. It seemed clean. Clara looked at him. "It's not clean anymore," he said. She didn't answer right away. The fire settled and shifted. Somewhere above them, on the second floor, Sophie's room was quiet. She thought about the first week in this house, when she had kept her suitcase mostly packed, as though being ready to leave were a form of self-preservation. She had cooked in the kitchen without touching the things she didn't need to touch. She had walked through the rooms with the careful awareness of a guest. She had been polite and efficient and entirely provisional, holding herself just slightly apart from all of it, from the pineapple magnet on the refrigerator and the measuring tape in the toolbox, and the child who stirred her tea 5 times and locked her door twice and was quietly, methodically building a replica of a building she had measured herself. She had thought that was armor. She understood now it had only been delay. "No," Clara said. "It's not." The decision arrived on a Thursday, 3 weeks later. It came in the morning, before Sophie had left for school. Clara saw the courthouse return address on the envelope and set it on the kitchen table and stepped back from it, the way you step back from something that requires your full attention and you want to make sure you're standing correctly before you face it. Noah came downstairs in his work clothes. He ran a civil engineering firm out of an office in town, the kind of small firm that did serious, unglamorous work, and he was serious and unglamorous about it, and he saw the envelope on the table and stopped. Sophie came in from the hallway with her backpack on. She looked at the envelope. She looked at her father. She looked at Clara. "Is it today?" she asked. "It might be," Clara said. Sophie sat down at the kitchen table, put her backpack on the floor, and folded her hands. She was clearly not going to school until this was addressed. "You should open it," Noah said to Clara. "Why me?" "Because you went first," he said. "In the courtroom. You should go first here too." Clara picked up the envelope. She opened it with the same care she brought to most things, not slow, but not careless either. She unfolded the letter and read it. Then she read it again. In the matter of the petition for custody modification by Gerald and Norma Fielding, the Honorable Patricia Holloway, presiding, having heard testimony from all parties, and having given full consideration to the expressed preferences of the minor child, the court finds that no sufficient grounds exist to modify the existing custody arrangement. Primary physical and legal custody of Sophie Renee Carter shall remain with Noah Carter. Clara looked up. Noah was watching her face. He read her face before she could say anything. He sat down at the table, heavily, and put one hand over his eyes. Sophie sat across from him, very still, reading the situation with her characteristic precision. "Dad," she said. He lowered his hand. His eyes were dry, but only just. "It's ours," Clara said. "You keep her." Sophie was around the table before anyone had fully processed the movement. She wrapped both arms around her father's neck and pressed her face into his collar. Noah's arms came around her, and he held her tightly, with the specific grip of someone who has been frightened of losing something for a long time and is only now beginning to believe they haven't. The kitchen held the 3 of them in the particular morning light that comes through mountain-facing windows in January, pale, clean, honest. After a moment, Sophie turned her head slightly without releasing her father. She looked at Clara. Clara smiled at her. Sophie, slowly, extended one arm toward Clara, keeping the other around her father's neck. Clara took the offered hand and held it. The week after the decision felt different, quieter, in a way that wasn't empty but settled, like the silence after a storm when the temperature has finally dropped to where it was always going to land. Sophie went back to school. Noah went back to the office. Clara went back to the reading she'd been neglecting for her structural analysis course. Life resumed its ordinary shape, which was, she was noticing, increasingly ordinary in ways that surprised her. She set her things up at the desk in the corner of the living room, where the light was good in the afternoons, and she worked while Sophie built her cardboard church at the kitchen table. They talked sometimes, and sometimes they didn't. When Clara got stuck on a problem, she found herself explaining it out loud, partly to clarify her own thinking, and partly because Sophie occasionally said something unexpected and useful, the way certain kinds of thinkers do, not because they know the subject, but because they ask the question that bypasses all the accumulated assumption. On a Wednesday evening, Noah came home with grocery bags because he had noticed, without comment, that Clara had been making do with whatever was in the refrigerator, and he had memorized without mentioning it what she tended to eat. She thanked him and put the groceries away, and the moment was small and unremarkable. And it meant something. That Friday, she called her mother. "How are things there?" Diane Bennett asked. She was cautious on the phone, the way she'd been since all of this began, afraid to ask too much, afraid to seem like she was calculating what Clara's choices had cost her. "Good," Clara said. She was standing at the kitchen window, watching the backyard where the snow had compacted into something solid and white. "Really good?" her mother asked. "Or are you telling me good because that's easier?" Clara considered this for a moment. "Both," she said. "But mostly the first one." Her mother was quiet. Then, carefully, "I think I am," Clara said. "More than I expected." After she hung up, she stood at the window for another minute. The yard was still. There was a bird at the feeder Sophie had hung from the porch rail, some small gray bird she didn't know the name of, patient in the cold. She would ask Sophie later. Sophie would know. That evening, after dinner, Clara found Noah on the back porch in his coat, looking at the mountain. She put on her own coat and stood beside him. The air was cold in the precise, clarifying way of high-altitude nights. "The arrangement?" Noah said. "After a while. The terms were the vow and the duration of the legal proceeding." "Yes," she said. "The legal proceeding is over." He was quiet. Somewhere in the dark, something shifted in the pines. "I don't think," he said, slowly, "that I know how to ask what I want to ask." "You're asking it," Clara said. "You're just not saying the words yet." He turned to look at her. In the cold, dark, his expression was the most unguarded she'd ever seen it, not vulnerable exactly, but open, available. "The arrangement should probably end," he said. "On paper, technically, she agreed. "But I don't want you to leave," he said. "And I'm not sure that's fair to tell you, because I know you have a life in Denver, and I know this was never supposed to be." He stopped, tried again. "I'm not asking you to stay. I don't think I have the right to ask you to stay. But I wanted to say the true thing, because you were honest in that courtroom, and I think you deserve that from me." Clara looked at the mountain. "I don't know what I want," she said. "That's the honest answer. 3 months ago I thought I knew exactly what my life was going to look like, and then I moved into this house, and now I have opinions about corrugated cardboard grain direction, and I know how many times chamomile tea needs to be stirred." She paused. "I don't think that goes away." He waited. "I have a semester to finish," she said. "I have courses I'm enrolled in, and a thesis I have to write, and I can't do those things from Aspen Ridge on a full-time basis." "That's just true." "I know," he said, "but Denver is 2 hours away, on a clear road, which, granted, is not a guarantee in January." Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, just a degree. "No," he said, "not in January, but it's not forever," she said. 2 hours. It's not forever." He nodded slowly. "I'm not making a decision tonight," Clara said. "I just want to be clear about that. I'm not making any decisions from the back porch in January. That is a firm rule I am establishing for myself starting now, and I intend to respect it." "That's fair," he said. "But I'm also not leaving tomorrow." "Okay," Noah said. She turned to face the mountain with him, both of them looking at the dark shape of it against the slightly lighter dark of the winter sky. The cold was sharp and honest and full of stars where the clouds had broken. The mountain did not offer comfort, and it did not offer answers. It simply existed at the edge of everything, massive and unconcerned, the way that certain permanent things do not indifferent, exactly, but longer than the questions being asked in its shadow. On Sunday morning, Sophie set 3 mugs out on the counter without being asked. Clara came downstairs in her socks and her sweater and found the tea already steeping, and Sophie at the table with her church model and a fresh piece of corrugated cardboard and a look of deep concentration. One mug was at Clara's spot, the chair that had, over 3 months, quietly become Clara's chair, in the way that certain things in shared spaces accumulate meaning without announcement. Noah came down a few minutes later, and they were in the kitchen together, and it was a Sunday morning in January with snow on the ground and something on the stove and 3 mugs on the counter, and it was so completely and specifically ordinary that it hurt a little, in the particular way that ordinary things hurt when you suddenly understand how much they matter. "I've been thinking about the tower," Sophie said, without looking up. She meant the bell tower on her model church. "I've been calculating the load-bearing requirements for the cupola, and I think I need to rethink the buttressing structure." "Show me," Noah said, sitting down beside her. Sophie turned the model toward him and began a measured explanation of the structural issue. He leaned in and looked at it seriously, asking questions that demonstrated he had been paying attention to previous conversations about the model, which he had, the way he paid attention to most things quietly, completely. Without advertisement, Clara stood at the counter and drank her tea. She stirred it 5 times, clockwise, without thinking about it. Then she stopped and looked at the mug. She had not noticed herself doing it. She looked over at Sophie, who was deep in her explanation, using her hands to indicate load paths, and at Noah, who was nodding and pointing at the roof, and saying something about cantilever angles. They were not performing anything. They were just having a Sunday morning conversation about a cardboard church's structural integrity. Clara sat down. "The east wall is going to need an additional perpendicular brace," she said, looking at the model. "There, at the junction. If you're worried about lateral load." Sophie looked up. She looked at where Clara was pointing. She examined the model. "That's actually correct," she said, with the particular tone of someone who has run the calculation in their head and arrived at the same conclusion. She picked up her pencil and made a small mark on the cardboard. "Thank you." "Sure," Clara said. Noah caught her eye across the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Later that afternoon, Clara stood on the front porch with her phone, watching Sophie attempt to photograph the snow in the yard with a disposable camera she had apparently ordered through the mail as part of a project on analog photography she had decided to pursue for entirely self-directed reasons. The results would be unpredictable, Sophie had noted. That was the point. Clara called her mother back. "I might come home for a weekend next month," she said. "Just to check in." "That would be wonderful," her mother said. "And I might bring," she paused. "I might bring some people, if that's okay." A beat of silence. Then her mother said, softly, "Of course it is." In the yard, Sophie frowned through the viewfinder of her disposable camera at a bird on the fence and advanced the film with studied patience. 2 hours away, the city was there. Her thesis was there. Her apartment with the radiator that ran too hot and the desk by the east window and the life she'd been building. It was all there, available, waiting. Here was also here. Clara put her phone in her pocket and watched Sophie photograph the bird. The winter sun had come out in the way it sometimes does in the Rockies in late afternoon, low and specific, turning the snow a pale gold, making everything sharp and clean and briefly perfect. The mountains stood at the edge of the sky the way they always did, enormous and patient, neither welcoming nor indifferent, simply present. Inside, through the front window, she could see Noah making coffee. She could see the light on the counter. She could see the church model in progress on the kitchen table, the small, precise marks that added up over weeks to something real. Sophie lowered the camera and said, without turning around, "Did you get my text message?" "I don't think you have a phone," Clara said. "Not yet, but I'm making a case for one." She advanced the film again. Emotionally, Clara sat down on the porch step and let the cold come up through her jeans. "Sophie, does it ever feel strange, That I'm here? Sophie turned around and looked at her with the direct, clear-eyed assessment that Clara had come to understand was simply how she thought. It felt strange at the beginning, she said. Not bad strange, just new. Like a new school year. It takes a few weeks to stop thinking about how different everything is and just start paying attention to how things actually are. And how are things actually? Clara asked. Sophie considered this with appropriate seriousness. She turned back to the bird, which had been replaced by a different bird. This one, a small brown one with a striped head. Sophie lifted the camera again. Even if you go back and forth for a while, Sophie said, still looking through the viewfinder. It's still better. Because you're in it now. You're part of it. The shutter clicked. Houses can hold more than people think, Sophie said, matter-of-factly. They're structurally more flexible than they look. Clara looked at the front door, where, through the glass, she could see Noah moving in the kitchen. The ordinary motion of a man making coffee in his own house on a Sunday afternoon, unobserved, unhurried, entirely himself. She thought about 2 hours on a clear road. She thought about chamomile tea stirred 5 times clockwise. She thought about a cardboard church with a bell tower and a corrected buttressing structure and a scale ratio of 1:47. She thought about a lock engaged twice in the dark, and a child who had taught herself to measure things precisely so they would fit where they were supposed to fit. The arrangement had been clean, straightforward. A set of conditions, a transfer of resources, an expiration date. But somewhere in the unplanned hours, in the 2 a.m. silences and the baking sessions and the mornings when 3 mugs appeared on the counter without discussion, something else had been built. Something that did not have a clean name. Something that was not finished, and might not be for a long time, but that existed now as a fact in the world, with weight and dimension and specific, particular details. Something real. The winter sun held on the snow. Inside, someone set a mug down on a counter with a soft, particular sound. Sophie advanced the last frame of film on her disposable camera and looked at it with satisfaction. All done, she said. What will you do with the photos? Clara asked. Document them, Sophie said. Label them by date and subject. Put them somewhere they won't get lost. She turned and went inside, stomping her boots on the mat. Clara sat on the step for another moment, in the cold and the last of the light, with the mountains at the edge of everything, patient as they always were. Then she stood up, and she went inside too.